Dentist Yoga, Roxana J. Manticof. Author's words. In the 25 years that I have been working as a dentist, I was presented with many signs which indicated that if I wanted to feel good, the only one responsible for this was myself. I will not recount all the times and the different situations I encountered with these characteristics, but I remember especially once when I was doing root canal treatments in a clinic. I got up one morning without being able to separate my right arm from my body, because I'm right-handed. I then made an appointment with my orthopedic doctor, who after his checkup told me that I had an inflammation in the shoulder called bursitis and I simply had to let it rest and take anti-inflammatory drugs. So, I called the clinic where I was working at the time and told them what happened to me. The head of the service told me that it was impossible to suspend the shifts given in advance and that I had to report to work as soon as possible. Therefore, I had no choice but to go back to my doctor to receive corticosteroid injections in and around my shoulder to restore movement, reduce the pain and go back to work with everything inflamed but now asleep or anesthetized. I continued like this with my obligations. I put it in quotation marks because now I see and think that it was more important to comply with myself by respecting and to cure first my sore shoulder, which still today often bothers me. As we see in the last paragraph, very often our priorities are somewhat altered and we often think that nothing will happen to us or that injuries, pains, contractures and muscular strains always happen to other people. Let's continue with another signal that, of course, was not the last and was presented at the end of the yoga course. That is when it is customary to invite several former students to recount their work experiences. One was a teacher who had dedicated herself to pregnant women, and another who had taught yoga in jail, and I think it was the latter who began her talk with the following question: "Did you ever see a dentist?" I was so amazed by her question, I simply could not believe it. My feelings and duality were terrible, because, on the one hand, I wanted so much to know what she had to tell about the dentists, and on the other hand, I frankly felt a bit offended because what she said and the way she said it sounded to me like, "Have you ever seen that strange creature called dentist?" I must say that I kept wanting to know what she was going to say because she was in a shock when all my classmates pointed me out. I think that was the last time she started her talk with such a question. Besides, they all looked at me as if they were looking for what they had to see. And as I always found myself at the end of the class, I felt like, cornered. I was at the back of the class because while everyone sat for hours with their legs crossed in the middle of the room, I could not do it. My back hurt so much when I didn't lean against the wall. It was a shame that back then, I did not have the maturity I now have to approach her and ask her what she was going to say about us, but I really did not feel it was necessary because that was the reason why I was there, doing the yoga course. I could go on telling you about many more signs, but you must be wondering, signs of what? Very simply, and as I mentioned at the beginning, signs that if we do not do something to improve our posture and our health, no one else will do it for us. I recommend you not to exceed when exercising. Try doing yoga instead or any other sport in moderation because, although it is advisable to train, we must be careful and not abuse of our bodies, taking into account our age and the work we do day after day. Hirami Shinya in his book The Enzyme Factor states that a lot of exercise does not benefit you and hurt you. On many occasions, I have been asked why it is important to practice sports and take care of our own body. My answer, and that of yoga, is the following: all of us are composed of three elements, a body, a mind, and a spirit. The first one we can feel when we touch it and is what we see reflected when we look ourselves in the mirror. Thanks to it we receive, through our senses, all the stimuli of our environment and interact with it and with other people. Secondly, we also have a mind that is in our brain, and therefore in our head, which is the source of our consciousness, thoughts, emotions, feelings, and the place which stores all our experiences. And thirdly, we have a spirit, which in my opinion is linked to everything that we cannot explain about ourselves, and which does not occupy any space in our physical body. Over the years, we move more slowly, our senses are damaged, and that is when we can enjoy our mind the most. There are no longer rigid times to meet, no children to care for. We can visit new places, study, learn other languages, enroll on courses we have always wanted to do, read more books, and grow as individuals. And if we did not know in the past how to take care of our body and how to lead a healthy life, exercising and eating in the most natural way possible, we will suffer from discomfort and pain that will distract us and prevent us from enjoying the great powers of our mind. For all of these reasons, we should take care of our body. Personally, I wanted so much to feel good again that I was overwhelmed by the feeling that I could do something for myself, and that was the real reason which inspired me to return to the school desk. Once I finished the yoga teacher course, I decided that as a yoga instructor I would plan several classes specifically designed to meet all my needs. But since it was often difficult for me to prepare and plan for many different classes, I began to practice by myself 4 or more times a week, and almost without variation, a fixed routine. It was at that moment when I finally realized that I was no longer nervous or wasting my time trying to interpret the sheet with the drawings of the yoga session I had on the floor in front of me, or think about what kind of exercises I would practice on that occasion. I definitely felt much better physically and even began to notice positive changes in my body and in my posture. Therefore, I thought about designing 2 simple and short routines that would give me everything I needed to keep myself well, and which contain the movements and postures of yoga that were simpler, more effective and not at all exaggerated or forced. Then, when I decided to share my yoga classes with all of you, I had to redesign them in a much more accessible and comfortable way, thinking of those who had never practiced before. For the same reasons already mentioned, I advise those who have practiced yoga for many years to add these new sessions to the ones they are already used to doing. Although I call them the energetic day class and the relaxing evening class, this does not mean that we cannot perform the night routine in the morning or vice versa. It is simply so that you can understand that the first is more invigorating and it is convenient to practice it at daylight, and as in the morning we get up with the whole body numb after having been several hours in bed. The purpose of this class is, therefore, to warm the body and make it more flexible. The other takes place for the most part on the ground and is for when it is very hot, and we are more tired, usually at night, or when we return from our respective jobs. Do not pay attention to the side of the body that I use in the recorded classes because I make them mirroring, that means that I am facing my class, so you will see that when I say, I turn my right arm I am really turning my left one, and this is just so that our movements coincide. We will begin with the guided classes that are a little more extensive, and when we understand them, we become familiar with them and remember the different exercises and postures, we will find that we can do the sessions in less time. Very often, I simply follow the audio of the dentist yoga video, and I do not need to watch it at all. And so as not to disturb my family with always the same sound and music, I try to follow the classes with the drawings, which we can find later in chapter number 15. Over time we will not need the video or the drawings of the classes, because the more we practice, and the more we memorize them, the better and more visible results we will get. So much so, that we will complete the yoga session in less time. I have been requested several times to record the practical classes with a green background to change the landscape, but I just want to show you that dentist yoga can be comfortably exercised at home. I have done this on purpose so as to complete each one of them in half an hour so that the lack of time is not an excuse to miss the practice. Sometimes I get up a bit earlier than usual to do it comfortably, and if I do not work that day in the morning, in the afternoon, or on the weekends, I can afford to exercise without even looking at the clock. Of course, I also put my cell phone in silence so that others do not interrupt me constantly or distract me, otherwise my body gets cool and I do not get to relax or enjoy the practice. After all, we all know that, if it is important, they will call us back. To my husband and children, I send only a brief message, I am practicing yoga. They then know the reason why I cannot answer their call at that time. On several occasions, I do not specify the number of repetitions needed for an exercise, or the time to stay in a certain posture, because I want each person to decide for themselves according to their preferences regarding practices and the time that takes to do it. Although sometimes I can distract myself and consequently, I can mix a little of what goes before with what goes after, I feel neither anxiety nor concern, since I do not need to be constantly incorporating or learning new postures or different exercises. And as they contain everything that my body needs, I find myself strong, comfortable and calm, and not feeling committed or forced by anything or anyone. I enjoy these sessions very much. Of course, I must warn you that the more disciplined we are, the better. Otherwise, we should practice in the company of another person, or establish predetermined days and times to practice. So, if you want to improve your posture and your health in general, if you are totally stiff, overweight or tired, you have to know that in order to have strength and energy you have to move. So, get up from your chair, wear comfortable clothes, put the music that motivates you the most and let's practice. I invite you to enjoy dentist yoga with me. You will see it feels so good. Roxana. Introduction. Dentist yoga is a method designed by Dr. Roxana J. Manticof, a dentist and yoga instructor, is based on classical yoga, whose origin in India goes back thousands of years. It includes exercises to strengthen the abdominal muscles and the entire lower back. Practice with weights, mainly to tone hands, wrists, arms, and shoulders. Soft and essential movements of the hip used to invigorate and flex it, some with extended legs, the same as those practiced by football players before starting a game, and others with flexed legs, which allows us to make much wider hip movements. Exercises to strengthen the back, knees, and steps and so forth. Other exercises to improve breathing, venous return, and circulation in general. Practice to reduce kyphosis, humped posture, and lordosis, inward curve in the lumbar spine. It also incorporates everything that the author considers important and necessary for the practitioner to perceive his body and mind in the best possible condition to offer his best service without neglecting his health and well-being. Of course, it is not a purely yogic technique due to all the different exercises that are incorporated into it, but since the basis and most of the postures included are taken from yoga, this is the reason why it is called dentist yoga. The purpose of this method is to allow the dental professional to have many good years in the fulfillment of his/her work without neglecting their own well-being, in order to enjoy practicing that profession and eventually retire from it with very good and prosperous health. Chapter number 1. What should be taken into account before starting yoga practice? We should start by talking about the care we need to take into account before starting a healthy yoga practice. Since many injuries, suffered by the yoga instructors themselves and by many of their practitioners, have been clearly described in various books and press articles. Thus, we can also find notes written by physiotherapists who have treated them. Let's not forget that yoga is a traditional physical and mental discipline that originated in India thousands of years ago, and in those times the average lifespan was much shorter. Obviously, if people lived less than today, yoga was created for young, healthy and physically fit people. This is something that we have to accept and be aware of when practicing because, although different postures and breathing exercises can be performed by older people, and is highly recommended, several of them are better avoided as they are very risky. The Yoga Master of Rose considers that our chronological age is not an absolute determining factor as far as the practice of yoga is concerned, and says, youth is a biological concept and not chronological. This is why we can see young people who seem and behave like old people, as we see older people with the soul and energy of a young man. And just as yoga is not for children, it is not for very old people. I do not intend to scare anyone, but I do feel that it is my duty to prevent damage that in many cases can become very serious or can take a long time to heal, especially if we practice yoga without paying sufficient attention to what we are doing. It is necessary, therefore, to learn to respect our body. The best thing we can do before starting a yoga practice is to make an appointment with a family doctor, since not everyone can practice it. We should first ask if practicing yoga may be appropriate for us, and if his answer is yes, we will ask him to tell us what we should consider taking care of ourselves, according to our age and our state of health. In addition, we need to be aware of how to avoid any negative repercussions of yoga practice on our bodies, such as wear and tear injuries, muscle strains, bursitis, etc. Among the contraindication for practicing yoga are the following: different eye conditions like glaucoma and retinal detachment, post-stroke conditions, arterial hypertension, heart diseases, sinusitis, epilepsy, vertebral, joint or muscular injuries, women with osteoporosis. In the event of pregnancy, it is indicated to do yoga for pregnant women with a yoga instructor specializing in that, and with a group of women in their same state. Here is an example of a medical record that we must complete and deliver before beginning the yoga practice. Finally, it is clear that the yoga practitioner is asked to be fully responsible for her exercises. This is essential, not only as a legal requirement but also to emphasize the importance of practicing yoga with utmost care, since, although it seems to be a very soft practice, it is not, and therefore we must learn to recognize if what we exercise today may prove to be detrimental to us in the future. For example, let us consider that, in the event of a sudden stretching of our spine, whether in forward, backward bends, lateral flexions or twisting, we may cause serious anomalies in the spine or hips, such as iliac sacral inflammation, herniated disc, to be explained later, or spinal stenosis. The latter is an injury that occurs when the space between the vertebrae narrows, causing pressure on the spinal cord or a certain nerve, which obviously produces much pain. In order to prevent any damage, we must avoid trying to overtrip ourselves in the different movements that we perform and respect each one of our vertebrae. We also run the risk of injuring our hips, causing inflammation or arthritis, wearing it out, or displacing one of its joints. In the case of the neck, it is very risky if we put weight on our cervical vertebrae. Let's stop putting pressure on ourselves and practicing everything in an exaggerated way, since we are not children, we are not in school. They do not give us good marks for what we do well, nor do they tell us off if our performance is not so perfect. Therefore, anytime we feel the slightest pain, it is advisable to slowly disarm the position we are doing and try to perceive what is bothering us, and even consider interrupting the practice for that day. And let alone we shouldn't leave the class without consulting our instructor or reporting to him/her what we feel and what is bothering us. If we are beginners, it is not appropriate to start yoga classes without talking to our yoga instructor, first to discuss our discomforts or pathologies, our needs, and expectations, as well as to know if the latter are real or not. Personally, and despite having practiced different types of yoga over the years, the style I most enjoy is Vinyasa Yoga. The master of yoga Krishnamakrija practiced and transmitted Vinyasa Yoga, which is a method in which the postures are connected to each other and flow smoothly one after the other. Both he and his son T.K.V. Desikakar firmly believe that yoga must adapt to the needs of each practitioner and not the other way around. The first master adapted his yoga to the first woman of his class, who was Indra Devi, and, like him, I take the audacity to adapt his yoga to us and our needs. The style I practice also derives from the same school, since my teacher Laura Akastimboim was a student of Raquel Zolberg, who in turn was trained by Raquel Riskin, who studied with Indra Devi. Krishnamakrija divided the practice of yoga into 3 stages according to what period in our lives we perform and what we could wish to obtain in each one of these. In youth, for the practitioner to develop muscular strength and elasticity. In middle age, to maintain health. In old age, so that we focus more on the spiritual than on the physical. Of course, yoga offers us an infinite number of benefits as long as we are aware of our practice. And for this reason, we must be attentive to what our body shows us before, during and after our practice. We need to heed warnings if we force ourselves to go beyond our physical capacity. To enjoy the different postures or asanas is essential to achieve the following 2 basic qualities. Sthira, that is to be able to maintain ourselves with firmness and stability in each posture. Sukha, which means to feel comfortable in those positions. As our body generally warns us before we injure ourselves, we must be able to recognize such signs or symptoms. For example, when we perform a certain movement or a defined posture, we hurt our head, neck, and shoulders, generally in inverted postures. The back, in its upper or lower part, while twisting are in excessive tensions as in forward bend pose. The Achilles tendon in downward facing dog, by trying to lower the heels to the ground without having enough elasticity or preparation. In the groins, by stretching and for opening the legs too broadly, whether standing or on the floor, for example in wide angle seated forward bend. In the knees or in the legs, as a result of different tensions and twists as in the case of two-legged table, or in half Lord of the Fishes pose. On the hips and knees, when practicing the lotus position or Padmasana. We must be very careful here, as the injuries are very common by the execution of a posture without the necessary preparation and elasticity. Let us also consider that in India, children begin to perform at very early ages. In short, we do not need to perform this posture to be equally practicing yoga. There are other parts of our bodies that might be injured if we are not attentive to our practice. Very often, the pain is not immediate and appears later or even the next day. This happened to me frequently after a session where I had practiced inverted positions on the head or on the shoulders. The discomforts were manifested to me as terrible headaches. At first, I did not make the connection with the yoga class of the previous day, but then I realized, with the successive classes, that this pain always appeared the day after the yoga class. So, I stopped practicing inverted postures and the pain simply disappeared. Glenn Black, who talks about injuries when practicing yoga, says he prefers not to do inverted postures so as not to injure neck vessels. I do not mean by this that the inverted postures are bad, simply that it was not convenient for me to do them. Maybe the pressure on my shoulders, neck and head was too intense because of my work to put the full weight of my body on them later. Added to this, we dentists usually have the habit of raising the shoulders continuously. When doing this, either by tiredness of the arms or to get closer to our patient, combined with the frequent inclination of the head forward or to one side with the intention of seeing better inside the mouth, these are the causes behind many headaches, migraines, and discomfort in the back, arms, and neck. These are, therefore, very harmful habits that we inadvertently perform in our work and which limit the free movements of the neck and head. It is something to take into account both when practicing yoga and when exercising any other physical discipline. Chapter number 2. Dentist Yoga. For all the reasons mentioned in the previous chapter, and for many others, I decided to study and become a yoga instructor, since I wanted so much to understand why yoga, which in the past had made me feel so good, was not like that now. Throughout the course, while studying anatomy, physiology, exercising in class and analyzing different postures with my teachers and colleagues, I began to understand several of the reasons why I no longer obtained from yoga what I needed. Once it was finished, I was designing my own practical classes because now, thanks to the yoga training course, I had all the necessary tools to design and prepare them. Since I know what I wanted to improve in myself, I learned what postures and exercises I should perform and which ones I should not. As time went by, I gradually noticed that my hump or kyphosis was disappearing and that the varicose veins in my legs were diminishing. I began to tone my abdomen, and I was appreciating less pain in the lower back. I paid more attention to lowering my shoulders every time I felt I was lifting them. I also strengthened my neck, my arms, and so on. It was very important for me to feel that my breathing improved considerably. The dizziness that I felt before for breathing badly and superficially, and which had always made me feel annoyed and tired, with frequent headaches and migraines, had disappeared. I was experiencing a deeper peace of mind, and by the whole body gained in strength and flexibility. My posture and overall health improved, and I appreciated a beautiful feeling that I had not noticed in myself for years. At last, I began to get from yoga what I needed. It was then that I felt that I should share everything I had learned and applied onto me with all of you, bearing in mind the saying, we are healed to heal, and we are repaired to repair. The most valuable thing I understood is that we have to do only what makes us feel good, no matter what the rest of the class is practicing. Let us also try to be further aware of the time spent in certain positions on hands, arms, shoulders, and neck because, if we feel a lot of pressure on them, it is advisable to discontinue and to rest. It is important not to repeat the positions that harm us more than the benefit we may get from them. For a long time, I was planning different yoga classes to diversify myself and to avoid the annoyance that may result from repetition of similar exercises, but, on the other hand, I have realized that as it happens with many different arts and disciplines and in yoga itself, singing, acting, martial arts, tai chi, artistic gymnastics, and as in all kinds of sports such as football, basketball, tennis, or golf, we all have in common that we often repeat the same routines or exercises. We repeat the same training over and over again, sometimes incorporating very slight variations. Somewhere I had read that Larry Bird, one of the best players in the NBA and an American basketball legend, would get up in the morning and throw 500 free pitches every day. That's the reason why he was the best. This is based on training, and continuing to gain experience in something very specific. Experience is the knowledge of something or the ability to do something that is acquired by actually doing it, feeling it or living it, one or more times, that is through repetition. Take for example a specialist in endodontics, who performs only root canal treatments, or surgeons who perform only surgeries. The same thing happens with the football player who trains the same routine of exercises every day, the singer or pianist who always practices the same scale or the same song until it sounds as they please. Or an actor or actress who repeats the same scene over and over again until they leave as the director and as they themselves want to see it. To become really good or outstanding at something means to do the same thing with insistence until we achieve the best standard possible. Specializing therefore, allows us to increase our performance and get all sorts of benefits. All this is normal and we can even aspire to be excellent, but we should never be perfectionists because many times in seeking the best we often spoil what is right. William Shakespeare. This is exactly what I think about the fantastic benefits of repetition, and it is what I feel every day when I perform my almost invariable routine of dentist yoga, which I now wish to share with you. The most important thing is to have patience and perseverance, since with continuous exercise everything that in the beginning seems perhaps a little complicated, as it is repeated we will adapt to it and make progress almost without realizing it. Designing many different kinds of yoga to demonstrate my extensive knowledge and just to please my ego would be a big mistake on my part, since on the one hand in yoga we are trying to get rid of the ego and on the other, these sessions might not help in the desired way. Many classes will only cause us complications trying to understand them and cause us to spend a lot of time trying to analyze or memorize them. This book includes a routine for the day or Brahmana, which is an expansion training, which creates heat and energy. We will do it standing up. It is invigorating and helps us to warm our whole body and prepare us to start a new and beautiful day. It also contributes to making us feel more positive and full of expectations. A routine for the night or Langana, which is different, more relaxing, more refreshing and softer. This class contains exercises and pleasant postures, in a seated position or lying down. It is an agreeable session that relaxes us and even prepares us to sleep better. As we repeat these same routines over and over again, we will become totally accustomed to them, and this will allow us to practice them well relaxed. In this way, we can lessen the anxiety that arises from the wounds of the ego, which can be produced by always having to do something different, something new that we do not know, or something that we have never done before and that maybe is very difficult at first. Let's take into account that everything that enhances our concentration, everything we do with pleasure and passion allows us to let go, even for a moment, of everyone and everything around us. We even forget the problems, the conflicts, the fights, and even our own minds, which constantly want to manipulate us with repeated, unnecessary and useless thoughts that generally do not serve us any good, and which just get us nervous, distressed and make us suffer needlessly. The recipe for success is this: as concentration is the key to success, and as one concentrates on the measure of the pleasure that obtains when one is doing an activity he likes, then, if one wants to succeed in something, one has to do simply what pleases him. Charles Poissant and Christian Godefroy. It would also be useful for us to learn to live and act with emotional coherence, as this will make us healthier and happier. Personally, I try to include this concept in a short and concise acronym that reminds me of it easily, TFD, which means that we must learn to think, feel and do the same and not think something and end up doing something different because that can even make us sick. This fickleness can also cause fear. A fear that of course, we ourselves create and that, therefore, only we can control by becoming aware of it. Chapter number 3. What leads us to frequent damage? First of all, I want to say that as I refer in this book to different texts and authors that I have read in Spanish, I apologize in advance if the translation is not so perfect. Let's continue. What also causes us great harm is our ego. The mania of constantly comparing ourselves with others. To speak of the ego, I will refer to what I have read in the book of Eckhart Tolle entitled The Power of Now, a book that I wholeheartedly recommend since it has helped me to understand many of the reasons for my own actions, as well as the behavior of others. His writings have inspired me to share several of his thoughts and then quote one of them almost exactly in his own words. The ego arises through our identification with the mind that creates a false self, an illusory self as the substitute for the true self rooted in our being. He feels vulnerable, threatened, and therefore lives in a constant state of fear, and to please himself, the ego always tries to find something to hold on to strengthen its illusory sense of identity. It means that our ego prompts us to imagine that we are something we probably are not. It makes us see ourselves, for example, as a super athlete, the best singer or as a young and perfect person, and therefore, many times we hurt ourselves physically and also emotionally trying to please an image that does not really exist, an image that is a self that our minds have created and therefore is not true. The ego is, in short, the attempt of our mind to perceive us as we want to be and not as we are in reality. For this very reason we must be very attentive, since by not perceiving ourselves as we really are, we can neither accept nor know ourselves, and we cannot come to love us as we are. The contribution of knowledge to our perception is the key because it will allow us to see ourselves and others more correctly. Far too often we do not take the time to perceive others as they are, and this is the reason why, upon meeting them, we idealize or admire them exaggeratedly, we give names and nicknames, and even hate certain people for no reason at all. Failure to perceive the other person correctly leads us simply not to accept them, and until we accept them as they are we cannot get to know them, let alone love them. To be able to remember this process we can use the acronym, PAKL. Perceive, accept, know, and love. Let us also consider several other important points here. First, we must learn to accept all our imperfections as well as all the imperfections of others, because while it may take us very little time to discover the defects of others, it can take us a lifetime to discover our own. Secondly, we cannot love another person in a different way from how we love ourselves, so we would have to understand this first. Finally, it is important that instead of idealizing certain people we take advantage of them instead as a source of inspiration and motivation, since if viewed like this it will effectively help us change. Why do we always have to be as the others want us to be? Let's go back to our childhood for a moment. We had to be as our parents and teachers wanted, and when we reached adulthood we have to be like as our partner, our children, brothers, bosses, and friends wanted us to be. Isn't this quite absurd? We all have the beautiful right to be as we wish to be, as we also have the freedom to choose what to think, what to feel, what to do and what to say, but when it comes to others deciding to be what they want to be, that's something else. And it bothers us greatly. Then we selfishly try to change them to be just as we want them to be. But never forget that a person only changes whenever he decides and he wishes. Also, if it bothers us that someone tells us how we should be and lead our lives, stop telling others how they should be and lead their lives. Is it that we and our lives are so perfect? In particular, we should stop trying to change ourselves to please others, because we will never complete this process. There will always be someone else to please, and sooner or later we will run out of energy. The mask will fall and those around us will begin to say, "You were so different when I met you," or "You were not like that, what happened to you?" Let's just think that each one of us is what he or she really is. After all, we do not have to prove anything to anyone. In addition, we must live with ourselves for many years, and therefore it is much more important to be faithful to our own tastes, our own needs and our own desires to be what we want to be. Let us say inwardly, I am what I am. If you like it, fine, and if you don't, that's fine too. But let's see, what is really our true self? Eckhart Tolle makes the following remark: the true self is the I am before the I am this or I am that. There is a story that Bernardo Stamatius tells in one of his books, and, to me, it describes the above perfectly. A woman dies and appears before a celestial court, and a voice asks, "Who are you?" And she responds, "I'm the mayor's wife." "I asked who you are, not who you married." "I am the mother of 4 children." "I asked who you are and not how many children you have." "I'm a school teacher." "I asked who you are and not what your profession is." The story goes on for a little while, but I stop at this last sentence because it is here where I have finally found what I felt a long time ago and what bothered me every time the others asked me, "What are you?" In the past, I used to respond swiftly and automatically, "I am a dentist." But now I know that this is just my job. Today, to the same question I usually answer, "I am what you see, what I do and what I say, and I cannot say anything else because honestly, I do not know, and I do not care to know." You may wonder, how is this at all possible? And I reply, it is very simple, because probably what I consider myself is not actually so, since, as we mentioned earlier, our own minds design for us a self or an ego that is what we wish to be and that does not represent at all what we are. On the other hand, I agree with Joseph Murphy, who expresses in his book The Powers of the Subconscious Mind that at no time is the ego our enemy, because our motivations arise here and according to them many times we act. But I think that if we want to be happy in this world, we have to understand that the ego becomes dangerous when it dominates and controls us. To better understand which ego we must take care of, the author himself reminds us of a photo of a cat looking at himself in the mirror, and in his reflection he sees a lion. This is the ego that we must take care of. In short, our ego does not need to invent a meaning of why we are here and who we are, because that meaning already exists, and whether we know it or not, if we are here it is for something. Joseph Murphy. Undoubtedly, we are all born as a being, we are simply what we are and everybody loves us for it. But with the passing of time and our interactions with those around us and our environment, we are designing ourself, I am this or I am that. Even over the years, the money we have, or our career, mistakenly becomes who we are. Many times, we believe that by inventing for ourselves a great ego it will make others love us more, value us more, or want us more. But we still feel empty and insecure. This is not good sense, as Pema Chodron observes. People who are poisoned by doubts about themselves become cowards. I remember and miss the love everybody had for us when we were children. They worshipped us only for being as we were, or the boyfriend or girlfriend in our teenage years, when we had no career, we had no work and no special things, and they loved us just the way we were. In other words, if I told you who I am, it would most likely be a liar, or rather a creation of my mind. For many years, I lived asking myself who I was, but now, in my 50s, I simply realize that I am what I am, as the song says, and that I do not need to define myself for anything or be anything special, or have a career or money or a particular car or anything specific to be an equally valuable person. I just live, love, read, study and work every day of my life to be, as they say, what I want to be and have the life I want to live. I also believe that if I have the privilege of getting old, I want to take advantage of it to study, to try to be a better person, to develop my abilities more, and to further mature with increasing wisdom, because, as George Bernard Shaw says, life is not about how to find ourselves, it's to create ourselves. In conclusion, I must say that at this time, when I answer the question "Who are you?" in this way, the questioner is kept thinking for a few seconds, maybe realizing what I want to transmit, or maybe not. But what I feel and what I have learned over the years is that it is worth fighting for what is worth having, and our professions, in general, are only to satisfy our needs, but at no time represent all or the only thing that we are. In fact, I personally consider that all of us are much more than our professions. Thinking like this is a healthier way of looking at ourselves, because we would then stop canceling ourselves if, for some reason, we are not able to continue our professions, whether we are doctors, artists, athletes, or singers. Bernardo Stamatis says, we could then bring to light all the other qualities that we possess and in which we are also good, those in which we would not bother spending whole hours doing them, since we would not even realize the time that elapses. When we recognize those qualities, we can train or work to perfect them more deeply, because it is smarter to develop into what we are good than to waste time trying to improve or train us in what we are not good, as it happened in our childhood when our parents and teachers tried to do it, generally without much success. Very often, thanks to our parents, teachers and other people around us, we consider ourselves foolish, a good for nothing, a donkey for study, a lazy person, or they consider that we will never marry, or achieve nothing in our life, and similar nonsense. I remember one person saying to me not long ago, "You know that I am currently studying at the age of 50, I am good at it." Now I realize that I am not as dumb as my parents and teachers always told me. What a tremendous thing! They made us believe so many things. Like, that we are not normal if we are lefties, if we are not good at mathematics, at languages, or any other discipline. That we need to have a career to succeed in life, that we are too fat to dance or have to be a Pavarotti to sing. Or, we are told that we have to be tall, slim and beautiful if we want to be loved. Let us consider for a moment how unimportant these objectives are, because in reality how many human leaders throughout history were not so perfect, but they changed the lives of thousands of people, such as Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, to name but a few. The best thing would be for us to stop constantly listening to everyone and to learn to perceive ourselves as we really are. Although many of us go through difficult times, we suffer, or we are wrong, just remember that, as Pilar Sordo admits, if we were fully happy we would not have the need to improve, or do anything else, or do anything differently. It is also important for us to learn to confront our own fears, whose most common weapons are fast talking and doing what fear tells us. So, when fear tells us to do this, not to do that, or to not go there, we need to confront it and do exactly what we fear. That is how it will lose all their power. Then, if I'm afraid of flying, I take the first plane and fly. If I am afraid of swimming, I enroll on a course and learn to swim, and if I'm afraid of approaching someone to talk, I'll go and talk to him, her. Since fears are created by our own minds, once we become aware of them, they will simply disappear. A very common example is the fear of the dark, which is simply the absence of light or any other thing or situation that makes us fearful, and all of them are only the fruit of our excessive imagination. We must not be afraid either of making mistakes, because they tell us that we are doing something, and suddenly all sorts of opinions, criticisms and even people begin to judge us. This reminds me of a short story that teaches us about criticism. One person, in the middle of a conversation, tells the other with much enthusiasm what he is doing and what his future plans are, when, suddenly, the other begins to criticize and repress him incessantly. The first one waits patiently until he finishes speaking and finally asks, "Have you finished?" "Yes," he answers. "Have you ever been visited by guests?" "Yes." "Have you ever invited someone to tea and cake?" "Of course," he replies. "And what did you do when the visitor rejected the cake?" "Nothing," he replied. "I just thought that if he did not want it, I would eat it myself." So, just like today you invited me with a cake of criticism and I really do not want it, so, you can do with it what you think best and even take it back with you. This story makes us aware that it is up to us to receive or to reject the bad reviews that others offer us, and all of this happens because when we do nothing, nobody gives us an opinion because there is nothing to judge. But when we do or start something and they start to censure us, we should even be happy. Because it is a sign that we are doing something. As Don Quixote told Sancho Panza, if a dog barks it is a sign that we are moving. And if by doing something we discover that we are wrong, or we have to face different obstacles because of it, we must remember that nothing in our lives goes until we have learned what it has to teach us. I definitely believe that making mistakes is the most creative thing that exists because it helps us to make progress and improve what we are doing, as it enables us to acquire new knowledge about how to do things, but now in another way. This is the process of learning, and we are all continuously educating ourselves, because what I am completely sure that the years were made to help us become wiser. There is nothing more beautiful than when your children call you and say, "Hello, I want to ask your advice." It would also be best for us to try to speak only about ourselves. Let us stop talking about others, avoid giving opinions about everything and everyone, criticizing or issuing unnecessary judgments that they did not even ask for, because all of this produces fatigue, illness, and the worst thing is that it takes away inner peace. By ceasing to judge others, we will at last stop judging ourselves. It will allow us to be happier, to feel much stronger and even healthier, because whoever looks outward sleeps, but whoever looks inward awakes. Carl Jung. Finally, we can say that it is important to learn to see ourselves as we are, and perceive our reality as it truly is, since the ego is like a lens that distorts everything because it defines the world in which we live according to beliefs that we have acquired throughout the years. And when we are close to certain people or looking for friends, or partners, rather than paying attention to what the other is or has, we need to perceive what we are or how we feel when we are with him or her. As we usually say, "I like what I am when I am with you," this is exactly what we should notice. The most important thing is the feeling and the courage that the other person gives us. Therefore, if we feel good, useful, appreciated, important and even cute, it is because the other enriches us and simply loves us. On the other hand, when we are with them we feel bad, sad, aching, silly, of little value, and even ugly. It is better that we simply walk away. Chapter number 4. We only see the other when they can be useful. I must say that in the pursuit of personal fulfillment I have read several books that have positively influenced me, and many times what I say is probably something I read in one of them. I have always enjoyed books whose authors refer to various writers, because I value the way they analyzed many books to summarize the things that interest me on a particular subject, in a single edition. Although I do not always agree with everything that a certain author thinks and says, I learn to take from them what I need for a specific purpose, and I do not criticize or judge their other reasonings or beliefs. It is of utmost importance that all the thinkers and the authors of various books which talk about happiness, peace of mind, physical and emotional health, how to avoid suffering, how to achieve what we want, who we are, etc. use ideas, thoughts, and phrases that have been taken from the Zen philosophy. Let's look at some of these as examples. The main problem of the human being is time. Living in the present. Stop wanting to stop suffering. Everything is a mental construction, and therefore we create our own reality, or the law of attraction in quantum physics. Reach first your personal happiness. Visualize the effect of your efforts and see them. Be able to create the realities that your mind wants, in the minds of others. Knowing and accepting ourselves as we are, allows us to love ourselves. Respect for oneself and the rest of the universe. We are not what we believe we are, it is only a mask called ego, and if we do not learn to dominate our ego, it will cause us much suffering because it is mainly based on comparison, and this is something that will only generate in us an inevitable disappointment. To achieve serenity and happiness we must learn to control and dominate our ego, because it continually forces us to want what we do not have, and that others probably have. This produces anxiety, anguish, and unhappiness. So, I could continue along these lines, but I think you already understand how many of the thoughts and writings have their roots in this Zen philosophy. And that, as I say, is only a philosophy and a secular branch of Tibetan Buddhism that was first recorded in the 7th century in China, and from there it was spread out. This is also called philosophy here and now, something that is probably very familiar to many of us who have read many books with similar titles. I just want to say that it is not my intention to borrow words or phrases from others, but on the other hand, I also think it is good to share with all of you what helped me to be happier, accept myself and accept others as they are. In short, be the person I am now and think as I think now. After this brief explanation, let's move on. Let us also take into account that we live in a very industrialized society, which mistakenly tells us that we must be only one thing, and that we have to specialize only in some specific thing, and if we make a mistake, we are dismissed for it, when, as we mentioned before, this is the most creative thing there is. A society in which, before asking our name, where we live or what we like to do, what sport we practice, if we have a hobby and so forth, the first thing we are usually asked for is, "What's your job?" Which would be the same as, "How much do you earn?" And depending on your answer, people will decide whether they are your friends or not. But let's think for a moment if this is the kind of friend we want to have close to us or who will accompany us in our most difficult times. As Pilar Sordo says in her book, Welcome Pain, it seems that in a world as convulsed and accelerated as the one we have built, one tends only to make someone visible when it can be useful to us, either out of fear or out of social need. And their family is no exception. The same author continues to narrate how many times we do not see a person, he is totally invisible to us until we need something from him. It happens many times when entering, for example, a public toilet, we never greet the person who is in charge of keeping it clean and orderly for our use, but if, suddenly we realize that we lack something, then we see it and even greet it very kindly and ask what we need. Or, how many times do we make different purchases and not even greet or notice the staff who works there? Of course, as soon as we have to complain to their superiors, we not only see them but even ask for their names. We have to learn to be kinder, to respect others, and to make life easier for them since they also simplify ours. Because if we all had the opportunity to study, if we were all teachers, lawyers, doctors etc., we would die of hunger, we would live in the dirt and without security or protection. I really like a description given by Eckhart Tolle, in which he expresses the thought that we are all rays of the same sun. Although we find it hard to accept, we are all in the same boat called life, and it is simply like a great theater where we all have certain roles that we have to play. And just as on stage no one has the right to take the lines of the other, so we must learn to respect what each one must be and do in this life, because if we constantly try to change it, we will be taking away from him the opportunity to embody what he was assigned to be. This will lead us to have to perform, in addition to our own role, also the role of the other. After all, someone will have to do it. And, by constantly meddling in the life of other people, the only thing we will achieve is to overload ourselves, and as a result, we will live more nervously, more stressed, more tired and even become sick. The latter can be seen in many of our behaviors. A very simple example, which almost always happens to us, is when someone, whether in our work or at home, does a certain task not in the way we would do it, and then we say, "No, this is not done this way, you have to do it this other way." Then, the other, if he is insightful, will generally respond, "It is better that you do it because you do that much better than me." Now I wonder, who ended up annoying, the other, that neither this time nor the next will do it, or we, who we will have to do it from now on? Let everyone do things their own way, since the only truth is that we all want to experience and learn from our own mistakes. It does not matter how many times others try to warn us, parents, teachers, elderly people, etc., because we know that we truly learn much more by doing things ourselves. It is advisable to lower our expectations with respect to others, because then we will feel that what little they give us, will be much, and wonderful. Also, we don't have to change for other people to love us, because just as we have the right not to love everyone, the others also have the right not to love us. Nothing will happen if someone doesn't love us. We will learn to live with it, because on the other hand there will be many others who will love us as we are. After all, we did not come to this world to please everyone. Likewise, we must avoid wanting other people to feel and think the same way we do, or to agree with everything we say, because just as we ourselves do not always agree with what others think or say, they also have the freedom to disagree with us, and we do not have to feel offended. With regard to this, There is a phrase of Ralph Waldo Emerson which I love, and it says, "Do not let me fall into the vulgar error of dreaming that I am persecuted every time someone contradicts me." Moreover, I believe that the new fashion of asking everyone, personally or online, if we do something right or wrong, if we are ugly or cute, fat or thin, etc., makes us lose the ability to assess for ourselves if what we are or are not doing is right or not. This beautiful virtue allows us to be free from people and expect nothing from anyone. By not doing so, we will prevent our being to be in the hands of others, and therefore, they will not be able to manipulate us by raising us to the sky or pulling us down when they so decide. We will be free from criticism and from our continuing need to be accepted or idealized, which is terribly damaging both to us and to the one who idealizes us. This is because when the bandage that covers the other person's eyes falls off, he will realize and let us know that we have nothing special or great, that we are a normal being with certain virtues, but also with some defects. Moreover, what we possess, whether material things, certain skills or careers, does not have anything bad. The bad thing is to believe that it determines how much we are worth, and, sincerely, I think that nothing of what we have serves us if we do not have with whom to share it. I personally compare the loss of our ability to decide and determine, with the use of a back straightening strap. This is a device that is placed in the upper back and serves to straighten it in cases of kyphosis or more common called humps. Many specialists have stopped recommending them since they have noticed and considered that instead of improving the pathology, it makes it worse. This is because it is more efficient to do exercises to strengthen the postural muscles and erectors of the back, since if there is something that supports it without having to work to correct it, the muscles become vaguer and even laxer, losing their tone and deteriorating this pathology much more. In writing the above, I remembered what I said with regard to the different tasks that we corrected in others and then we end up doing them ourselves. It is as if in this case our body also thinks, if there is something external that does that work for me, why am I going to do it? Over time I understood, since I now try to observe myself more consciously, that my mind invented for me an ego, that I often found too difficult to please, whether it was when I did too much physically efforts, and I, therefore, suffered several injuries in my body for demanding myself too much, or, emotionally, for striving with myself, continually judging and criticizing myself, and even with the others, arguing, quarreling many times, wanting to be right, or wishing to impose my opinion. I used to forget or not recognize that it was only my truth in accordance with my own experiences and it had nothing to do with what others lived for themselves. I was doing everything so that my mind and my ego, which are not myself, were satisfied. Eckhart Tolle states that by reacting immediately and to any unconscious acts of others, we will also proceed unconsciously. And he advises us that in the face of an unconscious behavior of the other, the important thing is to notice it, to recognize it, to embrace it with knowledge, and not to respond immediately, since unconsciousness and knowledge are incompatible and cannot coexist for a long time. So, let's just let it pass. Let us not continually ask questions in different automatic and instinctive acts of others, or with phrases said in a trivial and unimportant way. Questions like, "Why did not you greet me? Why did he not look at me? Why did you turn to me the face? Why did he shut me up? Why did he tell me that?" Or expressions like, "He looked at me in a weird way. He did not even thank me. He did not respond," etc. How many times did nor we ourselves see someone, or did not greet them because we were simply distracted thinking about something we did or we should do, something that we said or did not say, and so on. Let's get rid of all this once and for all and realize that just as others are not the center of our world, we are not the center of their worlds. Besides, we need to be a little more tolerant because the patience we have with the other will be the patience we will have to ourselves. Helen C. Schumann. Let us avoid embittering ourselves, even when we are mistreated, because this may be the target of the same abuser, because in his mind he sees us as superior to him, and feels that he cannot rise to our level, therefore he must lower us to equate himself and to feel better about himself. This he, or she, will try to achieve that through mockery, harassment, lies, criticism, offenses, even creating guilt or incessantly comparing us with other people. But never forget that no one can mistreat us without our consent, so if this happens, it is because we allow it and because our self-esteem, or the image we have of ourselves, is much deteriorated. So, the next time we feel offended or mistreated, we have to think that many times the problem is not in the others, it is in us, and that to modify it, we have to change ourselves. We will achieve this by loving and respecting ourselves much more, and thus our environment will improve as well. Let us analyze why we feel in a certain way with some people or circumstances, since it is only within ourselves, and when we see it or when we give it light, it will simply disappear, because there is no darkness that can survive under the light of the sun. Eckhart Tolle. Chapter number 5. Learn to relate properly to other people. Several of us often argue in our homes, in our jobs, with our partners, and we do so because our ego controls us for the simple reason that it sees disagreements as battles to win. By making a comparison that can make it easier for us to understand what happens when we are driven by the ego, it is like being carried away by a wild and frightened horse which will always take us where it wants. Instead, when a conscious and mature mind guides us, we will be letting ourselves be led by a domesticated and calm horse, which will take us exactly where we want to go. And when we find ourselves arguing with another person, we must try not to attack him, because this will hinder communication. Considering that when they feel attacked, the first thing they will do is defend themselves, which is normal and instinctive in all of us. After all, we do not always have to fight to win. An ethical principle of yoga that allows us to live well and which is appropriate to mention here is called ahimsa, which means nonviolence and respect for life. In many cases, we even need to constantly demonstrate to others that we are right, be it a couple, relatives, co-workers, bosses, friends, etc. And if we also consider that we should do it in public, this is usually because the other continually disqualifies us in front of the others. There are sometimes people who do it without realizing it, others because they want to make us feel inferior or because they simply feel superior to us. But let us remember that our reaction is national, since the other person should know that if we feel superior and communicate it, others will react in the same way, often ridiculing our suggestions and proposals. Joseph Murphy. If this happens frequently with our partner, it is a sign that it is time to talk to find the cause of the problem, because although at the beginning of our relationship we discussed simple things, such as what that person said, or what color was the shirt that he wore, as the years pass we will discuss for much more important things in relation to our children, our work, and our life. In order to enjoy a good relationship, it is also essential to respect the individual desires of each of its components, their dreams, and freedoms, and the reason is very simple: each one of us is what he is and likes what he likes. Something interesting and what Joseph Murphy describes as a big mistake is talking about the defects of our partner in life or the problems we have in our marriage, with friends and relatives. And he is absolutely right, because on one hand there are many specialized professionals who can help us solve marriage problems, and, on the other hand, we must know that acquaintances are not impartial at all. The only thing we achieve by doing this is to degrade and break the good image and presence of our partner, and from that moment the others will no longer see him, her as a good spouse. Even when we continually speak of the defects of our partner, since he is not responsible at all for the way we think of him, her, we are fixing that, first in our mind, and at the same time, by repeating it constantly and by making it noticeable so much, will remain forever in the mind of the other, because as Ralph Waldo Emerson used to say, man is what he thinks all day long. So, when we look for commonalities with others instead of differences, when we stop wanting what others have, and when we manage to be at peace with ourselves, we do not need to be always alert and continuously on the defensive. We can enjoy others and have some beautiful and harmonious conversations if we know how to listen first. Wisdom comes from listening, from speaking. Repentance, Sonia Gonzalez A. In her book, Skills of Communication and Listening, Sonia Gonzalez A. draws a list of the most common vices which prevent us from hearing others, and which I will summarize briefly below. Egocentrism, which only allows us to think about ourselves, to achieve our desired results and demonstrate our achievements. Our desire to isolate ourselves or to lock ourselves in, whether with the television, the computer, our mobile phone, a book, and so forth. Being impulsive or obsessive in the tasks we do, which does not allow us to listen, or because we do not have time for it. Being constantly stressed and anxious with our own agendas, our to-do list or the number of errands we must complete. Or because of the scandal, or the noise, of our own voice or our exaggerated laughter, prevents us from listening others. Also, we may not listen since we are always distracted and immersed in our own thoughts. Sonia Gonzalez also says that we respect the feelings of others and the others feel more valued when we listen with interest and allow them to expose all their ideas first, then we can start with our own. In that way, we learn a lot and grow as a person, and it is the best way to negotiate whatever it is since both parties win by being able to express their needs and interests. After all, communication means to put in common, to share. And ultimately people will enjoy our company much more if we know how to pay attention to them. Very often it happens that we are trying to talk to another person, and I say trying because they are constantly interrupting us or speaking at the same time, not listening to what we say and not paying to us the slightest attention or empathy. This is because they are probably thinking what is the next thing they are going to say, and, in doing so, they not even allow a beautiful silence to arise between words. One time I found that it was impossible for me to finish a sentence without being interrupted. I simply stopped talking in order to find the right moment and ask the simplest of questions. Why? The other person, perhaps out of curiosity, was silent for a moment and then I repeated the same question but now a little bit more complete. Why instead of being talking at the same time as I, don't let me tell you what I want first and then you do. Then, she answered me very spontaneously and gave me the exact answer that finally opened my mind. Because I do not want you to think that I do not know. Wow! I thought, what a clear and obvious answer. That is, I said to myself, the whole problem of people who do not give us our place in a talk is because it is being handled by their mind and therefore by their ego as they believe the following. Perhaps you're tempted to believe for a moment that you know a little more than I do. That you're better than me, maybe you think that what happens to you is more important or that it does not happen to me too. We must pay attention to the number of times we fight with other people, simply because we do not want the other to even think that we do not understand something that he does, or that we do not know how to do something that he does. We should slightly change our way of thinking and act, although it is very difficult to change habits, even if we know that they are harmful, also for ourselves. By watching them and being more aware of them, even our way of life will be enriched. Let us learn to listen for a moment without saying anything and with empathy, and then express what we want because we always receive what is given. And if our interlocutor has the ability to appreciate how we give them their space, he will also know how to respect ours. Not stopping talking, not being silent for a moment and not listening to the other is a defect that damages our image and personal growth. Sonia Gonzalez A. When our partner, children, parents, bosses, or other people tell us something obvious, something we already knew or ask us to do something that we would do anyway without being asked to do it, since just smiling will suffice. Do not get stuck in fussy discussions that do not lead us to anything good, since all this tension is absorbed by our body and that is how it will take years of our existence and therefore, we will live less. Returning to the previous conversation, after the other person told me because I do not want you to think I do not know, I continued. You could let me speak for a moment and then answer with a simple, yes, I knew it. Then she answered immediately. But I did not want to disrespect you. What can we do? Young people today have an impressive mental agility and all the answers at their fingertips. Maybe many of us, in similar cases, would still be thinking, why did not I say this? I would have done that. I should have kept my mouth shut. Continuing my chat with her, I answered. It does not bother me nor is it humiliating for me if you know more or the same as me. We should be aware of the fact that with the ease which everyone is exposed to and receives so much information at the push of a button on the computer, it is very understandable that they know many times more than we do. I even have many patients who are self-diagnosed. They enter the room for consultation knowing everything. I was looking on the computer, I know what happens to me is this, and the treatment you have to do is the following. What do you think? Often, I ask people who love me, especially my children who are my best teachers, that if there is something I say or do that bothers them, they have my consent to let me know. I do not deny that many times, what they make us notice may strike us like a slap, but I think if this is the only way to see what we do wrong, welcome. In addition, thanks to this I have managed to improve my way of being, behaving and speaking. Therefore, I allow them to tell me, I do not like when you tell me that. Or, it bothers me when you do this. My daughter once told me that she does not like when I remove the dishes from the table after eating, or when I set up something in her house when I go to visit her, and ever since she told me that, I do not do it anymore. She is happy and so am I. Only then can we notice the attitudes or actions that we do unconsciously, and when other people express them, they give us the opportunity to change, if we deem it necessary. Since most of the time, our ego is so great that it prevents us from observing that what we do or say may upset other people too much. Chapter number 6. Being manipulated by the ego. For those who are manipulated by their minds and their egos, or for those who depend on the opinion of others to know how much they are worth, what I say can be annoying, that it is good for us to allow people who love us to point out our mistakes, even if we are adults. Because they have taught us to respect the elders. Without taking into account the fact that by allowing us to see our mistakes, or letting them notice the nonsense we usually say or do, it really helps us grow, mature and become more intelligent and better adults. It is important to understand this and to be truly attentive, since the ego is the unobserved mind that directs your life when you are not as an observer, as a witnessing consciousness. Eckhart Tolle. The same author also names the basic patterns of the ego, which are the desire to control, avarice, aggressiveness, a defensive attitude, resisting to what is, that it is neither good nor bad, it is simply what it is, and nothing else. There is a very nice Zen story which illustrates the last one just mentioned. It tells the story of a marriage of elders who had a single son who loved and cared for them with much devotion and affection. Once the young man rode out with his horse as he did every day, but he fell and broke one leg. The neighbors began to say, "What bad luck! And now, what will become of you?" Within a few weeks, the army entered the village, seeking to recruit every healthy and strong young man there, but as the son of the elderly couple, although he was young, had a broken leg, they left him in his house and did not recruit him. I do not think it's necessary to say more, except that the next time something happens to us, although it may at first appears to be one thing, let's not label it as good or bad, time will tell. To explain what each of the basic patterns of ego means, I will refer partly to what Helen C. Schumann writes in her book A Course in Miracles. With regard to control, or by continually trying to prove that we are right, we are indirectly admitting that we may not have it. And when we get angry and resentful, that's because we do not accept the idea that not everybody is, thinks, or acts as we would wish. Therefore, our bigotry is a product of not accepting that everything is not under our control. Only when we acknowledge that and accept it, we will be able to convert the anger that we feel to better understanding, respect and, consequently, greater tolerance. In addition, as discussing with others is a self-nourishing habit, let us not invest all the time to make others change their mind, since, according to William Blake, a man convinced against him, will actually retain his opinion. The desire to control also refers to our permanent obsession with wanting to judge everything. As for avarice, Helen C. Schumann expresses that the ego is afraid to give because it means having to deprive ourselves of something. Instead, being is never afraid to give, since we give to receive something better and because we can give it up. The aggressiveness, according to the same author, appears when the mind and behavior are at odds, that is, it is the result of our lack of decision that leads us to do something that we do not really want to do. The only thing that encourages aggression is fear, and since it is produced only by our mind, we can learn to control our thoughts, to avoid feeling it. About the defensive attitude, there is a very clever phrase by Helen C. Schuman that I personally adore, which says, "Do not defend yourself all the time because you are proving that you are susceptible to be attacked." Another pattern of the ego is guilt, that will always generate punishment since, as any guilty action must be punished, and in our body, this is no exception. Then we can suffer from different aches and diseases as a result of feeling guilty. Therefore, we must eradicate from our minds, in addition to all faults, all resentments, that we create ourselves or that create certain people who live with, or are close to us, because they prevent us from enjoying everything, everyone and even ourselves. The only thing we do by blaming ourselves for something is to suffer in vain and waste our time. After all, we know that ultimately guilt does not have the power to change the past. And very often, we continue to blame ourselves when the people who created the feelings of guilt we have and feel, are no longer in this world. Finally, I understood, thanks to everything I have been going through over the years, that time does not help us forget anything, but it makes us mature into a better understanding of the things that happen to us. I also understood that I will continue to educate myself the rest of my life because I think like Helen C. Schuman that we stop needing to learn when we have nothing to change, and if there is something in us that bothers us, it is simply pointing us out that we should change it. Very frequent are our feelings of guilt in relation to our parents, because we did not do anything for them or for their anguish, or because we were not around when they needed us most, or because they themselves were unhappy and did not have the courage to get divorced, or because they did not take a university career they wanted or did not save money for their retirement, and so on. But only when we grow older do we realize that we ourselves are the only ones who can take a courageous and meaningful decision, or that we must do something transcendental that can change the course of our own lives. And, if our fear or our cowardice prevents us from moving on, under no circumstances should our children, whether they are small children, adolescents or even older, perform them in our place. Therefore, I do not understand the unhealthy habit of tolerating other people, couples, parents or other relatives if we know that they make us unhappy, they treat us badly, they manipulate us continuously, they only use us and they do not even love us little. Many times, we think badly that our parents may have the right not to love us or even not to accept us, but we feel guilty if that is what happens to us. As for our children, they only come into this world through us and they are not our property, just as we were not the property of our parents. Maybe they do not notice now many things or situations taking place, but we, who were children and who are now parents or grandparents, know, that when they will be in our place and reach our age, they will realize everything. And before criticizing them, let us think for a moment about what we were and what we did or did not do when we were young. Why we always want to receive what we never gave to anybody. Sometimes they give us very little love, but if we pay attention to the people who were around them when they were children or young people, we will realize that many times they gave us much more love than they themselves ever received. Let us not blame ourselves for what our parents are, ultimately they are what they chose to be. Much less blame them for how we are or what we do wrong, because this is something which we decide alone. This reminds me of something that very often happens to me in my clinic when, after seeing a mouthful of dental plaque and gingival inflammation, I tell the patient, "You have to brush your teeth better, your gums are very inflamed and bleeding, and this situation is not good at all." And then most patients respond, "It's a family problem, my parents have the same thing." I wonder, are the cleaning of the mouth and the brushing of teeth when we are adults, the responsibility of our parents? We give thanks that they are parents, so we can blame them for everything. It is curious that when we are children we blame our parents for everything we are and sometimes for what happens to us, and when we are older we are the ones who blame our children the same way. Let us then recognize that, as Facundo Cabral used to say, strange thing is a man, to be born he does not ask, living he does not know and dying he does not want. I will summarize everything we said in this chapter with a fantastic paragraph by Joseph Murphy from his book The Powers of the Subconscious Mind. When a man understands the creative law of his mind, he ceases to blame others and the conditions that hinder his life, He knows that it is his own thoughts and feelings that create his destiny, and he is aware that the external is not the cause which conditions his life and experiences. To believe that others can destroy our happiness, that you are the ball of a cruel destiny, that you need to oppose and fight with others to be able to live, all these and similar things are unsustainable once you understand that your thoughts are feasible, that what a man thinks in his heart will be. Then, the next time we find ourselves blaming others for our suffering, or if we are too bothered about the way others act or react, let us remember something that in emotional intelligence is called the mirror theory. It states that other people are mirrors of ourselves, and if we find in them behavior, a quality or an attitude that bothers us too much, this indicates that, in reality, it is something that bothers us about ourselves. It's like looking at yourself in a mirror, form in face-to-face reflection. You're not the reflection, but the reflection is you, Hokyo Zanmai. One day I tried to put this to the test with a person with whom I fight constantly and with whom I find it difficult to agree. Then I said, okay. Let's see what annoys me the most when we argue. I then place all my attention to observe it, and that's when I realize that it bothers me a lot to see the way in which the other always tries to finish the discussion to his advantage. In Argentina, we usually call these people zapata, which means, if he does not win, he wants at least to get a tie. It is unbelievable, but finally, I could see myself looking at the other, in my mirror, that what bothered me most was that I did the same. This is how I finally recognized that I was also a zapata. Having the courage to observe this was very important, but it was only the first step. Then I had to try to change it in myself, since the other person doesn't seem to be bothered by this at all, and, as we have already mentioned, changing the other person should not be our goal or purpose. Dr. Rilke states that when we react to what someone does or we criticize them, it is because there is the same thing within ourselves. It is the memories, the energy we share with that person, and it is then an excellent opportunity to cleanse ourselves. Let's put ourselves to the test and see what is bothering us most about others. We need to keep in mind that in order to grow and mature as human beings, we must be humble and not believe that everything in us is perfect, that the problem is always in others, because, according to Zen philosophy, the greatest obstacle to learning something new is the belief that we already know. Eckhart Tolle thinks that in order to recognize in the middle of a discussion if we are being manipulated by our minds and by our egos, we should for a moment stop talking and ask ourselves introspectively, who am I defending? Something called ego that does not exist and that is an invention created by my mind. This is how we can quickly put an end to any discussion which often ends up hurting ourselves more than others. Chapter number 7. Before changing our own actions we dislike, we need to modify our own way of thinking. If we want to change the part of our behavior that we do not like, before changing the action, such as speaking too much, not letting others express themselves, judging or criticizing all the time, giving our opinion about everything and everyone, getting violent, eating everything, drinking a lot of alcohol, and so forth, we should first change our way of thinking because it is simply our mind that tells our body what to do. We need to take the responsibility for recognizing what we are and what we do, and stop blaming others for it. If, for example, we go to Alcoholics Anonymous, Violence Anonymous, Overweight Anonymous, the first thing they ask us to say loud and clear, "Hello, my name is, and I am." Ideally, we should not say "I am alcoholic, poor, fat, diabetic, etc., because by doing so we are declaring that this is what we are and it will be very difficult for us to change it. Instead, if we say, "I am temporarily sick, financially a little adjusted, drinking a lot of alcohol, etc., we will declare that what happens to us is transitory and that it can change anytime. When we can understand what we do and why we do certain things, that is when the transformation will take place. To do this, we will begin by observing all our unconscious feelings, thoughts and actions because only by seeing them consciously, we can control and reform them. The difference between what we are and what we want to be is what we do. Robert Kiyosaki. By changing our way of thinking, our way of living will change too, And just as our thoughts can make us sick, they can also heal us. But, if there is a duality and our mind wants one thing, but our body wants another, we will not achieve any change. An example would be the famous phrase, "Tomorrow I will quit smoking, but right now I am taking a cigarette to smoke." The only thing that our mind perceives is the intention to do it, and we do absolutely nothing with only intentions. Or, when we want to lose weight, but we are not at all willing to make any changes, neither in our diet nor in our habits. As for diets, stop smoking, stop drinking alcohol, etc., the most important thing is to know that if something is eliminated, we must replace it with something else. For example, the smoker substitutes the cigarette with chewing gum. The same must be done with food, because our mind does not like empty spaces, feels it and begins to torture us for what we have taken. The same thing happens to me when I practice yoga. I leave an empty and extended mat next to me. If any of my children pass and see it empty, most likely they will occupy it. Therefore, my advice is to do this when you practice if you want to disconnect your children from their computers, even for a moment. So let's put aside all dualism. Let's see what it is that we want to change and say, believing this really, now I am determined to abandon this, because I love myself and because I want to stop doing the things that hurt me. And let us remember an Arab proverb that says, "Whoever wants to do something finds a way, and who does not want to do anything, finds an excuse." There is a phrase that refers to the relationship between overweight and fear, which says fat is the outward expression of an inner fear. If this is so, only we can truly seek within ourselves to understand what makes us anguish, because covering ourselves with fat to protect us from our various fears will never allow us to lose weight. The best solution to avoid being overweight would be to eat like children. They simply eat when they are hungry and stop eating when they are no longer hungry, even if there are still remains on the plate. We were always forced to eat at certain times, although often we were not hungry, and to finish everything on the plate because, like our parents and grandparents used to tell us. Do you know how many children in the world have no food? With regard to this, Sandra Ray in her book The Only Diet says that eating when we are full of heavy feelings like guilt, sadness, pain, resentment or fear, also fear of death, will always lead us to be overweight, and that until we get rid of those fears nothing will change. Ideally, according to the author, is to make a fast of negative thoughts. In general, we say that it is the food that kills us, when what really kills us is what eats us, like all the harmful feelings just mentioned. In the same book, the author does not speak at all about which foods we should eat or which we should avoid. She states, "It is our beliefs and attitudes that allow food to be used to gain energy and vitality instead of becoming fat in our bodies, because, if you think that food makes you gain weight, of course, your weight will increase. And, as our mind does everything we say it, if we say how fat I am, that will be so." To better understand how this works, I will summarize part of what Joseph Murphy says in his book The Power of the Subconscious Mind. As we all know, we are endowed with a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. The first is like the captain who steers his ship, and the second, the subconscious, are his sailors who receive the orders and make sure that everything works perfectly and are, therefore, those who act continuously. They do not protest and never contradict the instructions of their captain, although they do not know if they are correct or not. Everything is done immediately and without opposition. For this reason, we have to pay close attention to what we believe, how we talk about ourselves, and what we say to ourselves. We never have to accept or allow other people to speak badly of us, or hurt us with their comments, because we may take them as truth, and then our subconscious mind will begin to carry them out, like the mechanical habit of saying, "I am fat. I am a mess." Or when we ask others, "Am I skinny? Am I cute?" Or to doctors, "How many years do I have left?" And according to what they answer us, thus it will be. If this is what we do, let us forget it, and stop giving others so many powers over us. Henry Ford used to say, not referring to food of course, but to how our mind satisfies what we manifest, that whether we think we can or think we cannot, we are right. So, if we say "I cannot do it, I cannot buy it, that's impossible for me, I do not deserve it, I'm not going to pass the exam, I'm going to get sick, what a fool I am, I should not be eating this, or I'm going to gain weight by eating so much, etc. The subconscious mind will receive and obey the orders that the conscious mind believes and accepts as true. Let's stop consenting to everything that others tell us, or to eat with harmful preconceptions, and then kill us in the gym while we continue to think that we are fat, because we are not going to achieve anything with it, and we are not going to lose any weight. Let's focus more on our health, on how we feel, and not on how much we weigh. But, in short, why do we exercise? We exercise for many reasons, such as to boost our mood and self-esteem, eliminate anxiety and stress, and prevent diseases like hypertension, diabetes, osteoporosis. Also, to age better and increase our quality of life in general, and even to develop a greater concentration and improve other mental abilities. Exercise speeds up the metabolism, our muscles use more oxygen along this process, and we can feel this because we breathe more and our heart beats faster. Another advantage is that we relax and strengthen the muscles that protect our joints and thus avoid different injuries like sprains and strains. I could continue to name an infinite number of benefits that we obtain by doing sports or any other type of training, but if we want to lose weight, rather than spending hours in the gym, we should try to eat more consciously, with less guilt, perhaps less quantity, and really enjoying what we eat. And if we exercise in excess with the sole intention of burning calories because we eat too much, or only to lose weight, or if we feel that the exercise dominates us instead of us dominating it, this can simply indicate that we have an alimentary disorder and that we should consult with our family doctor. Children and adolescents who exercise excessively should be very careful, as they require calories to complete their growth process. Therefore, as parents, we have to pay attention to their diets, and to any disproportion in their workouts. In short, let's eat with pleasure, only when we feel hungry and without talking nonsense, or being distracted in front of the television because we keep on eating until the program that we are watching has finished. Let us not do it out of obligation or because it is time to eat, or not to despise someone who serves us and fills our plate. Even less should we finish the leftovers left by our children on the plate because they get cold, since we can keep them in the refrigerator in airtight containers and then heat them, even if it is 1 minute in the microwave, or in any way we think best. I have realized over the years that when I say I do not eat that because I am trying to lose weight, or because I do not usually eat such thing, etc., everyone tries even harder to make me eat it. And, when I simply say, I do not eat that because I do not like it, then nobody tries to impose anything or force me to eat what I do not want. Children should not need to wait until dad and mom come home from work so they can eat with us or so they can see us. Let's stop being so selfish, let's think about them a little more, but if that's what we really want, we need to reach home at more normal and fixed times, because children do require a more precise routine, otherwise, they become annoying, anxious, and get very nervous. They need their spare hours to play, to eat quietly, to receive a beautiful and relaxing bath, and to go to sleep having briefly digested their food, and it is well known that they need to sleep much more than the adults. Many parents even think that children do not respect them because they do not wait for them for dinner. Please. It is we who do not respect our children by not considering their schedules and their needs. And when we come home late and are already in their beds, having the privilege of telling them a story or singing a song and kissing them to show how much we love them, that is wonderful and for our children more than enough. We must also avoid justifying that we work late for our children so that they do not lack anything because we lack them, which is what they most need. Let's stop fooling them and ourselves, because if we work without limits, it is because we like either the work we do or the money we get. And, if we always get home late, it is maybe because we do not tolerate being in our homes or with our spouse, or whatever. Let us try to be honest with ourselves, and thus we will live a happier life, without blindfolds covering our eyes. It is in the nature of man to cherish several interests and devote more time to his job than to his family. As Karl Albrecht explains, they have shown that women tend to give personal relationships greater importance and meaning than formal relations defined by structure, work, social dynamics, etc. Men, however, seem to give precedence to structure and function, formal organization, over personal relationships. It is said that a book should have the ability to annoy the reader, and I think I am accomplishing it, right? Then let's continue. Chapter number 8. Let's admit that there are things that we cannot change. Let's relax with what we are and accept everything that happens to us that is neither good nor bad, it is simply what it is. Let's admit that there are many things that we cannot change, and let's learn to use our minds to do certain practical or intellectual tasks in order to be more effective in our lives, in our jobs, and in what we do every day. Let's stop fighting and arguing all the time, and let's allow the other to be right if that is what pleases him, because we can notice how his mind desperately uses him to please his fictitious ego. You may wonder why I talk so much about the relationships we have with other people, but the answer is very simple: because both, in our jobs and in our lives in general, we are surrounded by them. Being intelligent in dealing with other people or having social intelligence is essential, since, as H. Wells says, social intelligence could be, in the long run, one of the most important ingredients of our survival as a species. Karl Albrecht in his book Social Intelligence defines it as follows: it is the ability to get along with others and get them to cooperate with us. Social intelligence is only one of several types of multiple intelligence described by Professor Howard Gardner, and that Karl Albrecht classifies in a simpler way into 6 primary categories and summarizes them with the acronym ASPAK. 1. Abstract intelligence, symbolic reasoning. 2. Social intelligence, dealing with people. 3. Practical intelligence, achieving results. 4. Emotional intelligence, self-awareness and autosuggestion. 5. Aesthetic intelligence, the sense of form, design, music, art, and literature. 6. Kinetic intelligence, skills concerning the whole body such as sport, dance, music, or piloting an airplane. According to the same author, the ideal would be to learn to develop a culture of multiple intelligence, and also names 5 dimensions of social competence. These are 5 skills that we should possess if we want to improve our interaction with other people. He shortened them with the acronym SPACE and devoted a complete chapter to each of them. Here I will summarize them using his own words. Situational awareness: it means appreciating the different points of view that others may possess and having a practical sense of how people react to stress, conflict, and uncertainty. Having a good situational radar is having a respectful interest in other people, because if we are closed in ourselves, it will be more difficult for other people to accept us, share their way of being, appreciate us, and cooperate with us. Presence: it is the way we affect individuals or groups of people through physical appearance, our mood, the way of being or character of a person, attitude, body language, and how we occupy space in a room, whether we are accessible, whether we transmit trust, professionalism, kindness, and empathy, or whether it is not like this at all. It is important to pay attention to the sense of presence we communicate, especially if we want other people to accept us and take us seriously. Authenticity: this reveals how honest and sincere we are with people and with ourselves at any moment. To be authentic is to respect ourselves, to have faith in our personal values and beliefs, and to treat the other person face to face. Clarity: it is the ability we have to express our thoughts, opinions, ideas, or intentions clearly. I say what I think what I say? Do I inspire confidence or not? Do I use proper language and skill? Do I listen carefully to understand the other's points of view? It also includes the sound and volume of our voice. Empathy: the dimension that invites us to contemplate the extent to which we are aware and considerate of the feelings of others. Do I accept others for what they are and how they are? Do I identify with other people, appreciate them, and share their feelings? In the context of social intelligence, Karl Albrecht adds the sense of connection that inspires people to cooperate with us. John C. Maxwell points at the same thing by saying always touch a person's heart before asking for a hand. I will try to summarize very briefly what Brené Brown, American, author of several and interesting books, among them The Gifts of Imperfection and at the moment research professor of social work at the University of Houston. When she speaks about the power of vulnerability, she says that the sense of connection with other people, that is when we feel that a relationship is truly worthwhile, is what gives meaning to our lives. According to the author, the disconnection is caused mainly by the shame that is the fear of disconnection, the fear that the others can leave us aside, and is centered, therefore, on oneself. I am bad. The two shame tapes are: I'm not good enough, or if it would be a question, who do you think you are? Shame is related to addiction, depression, violence, aggression, intimidation, suicide and eating disorders and is completely normal. We all experience it, unless we do not feel any sort of interest or empathy for the other. In women, it is based on a large number of expectations and skills impossible to obtain related to everything we are supposed to be, and in men to be perceived as weak. In order to establish a connection, others must see us as we are, and for this we must have the courage to be imperfect, kind and compassionate, first to ourselves, to do things without having any guarantee of getting something in return, and to be authentic. That means, to be able to renounce to who we think we should be and simply be what we are. All this means that we have to allow that vulnerability be noticed, since, just as shame, fear and our struggle for dignity originate in it, happiness, creativity, innovation, change, belonging and love also arise from it. This shows us, therefore, that we cannot love or enjoy anything if we do not allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Brené Brown also reminds us how we constantly try to numb ourselves with pills, alcohol, drugs or food, because we are afraid of being vulnerable, but it is impossible to desensitize us from bad things, fear, embarrassment, disaffection, abandonment, bad relationships, insecurity, and so forth, without desensitizing us also of the good things, love, happiness, gratitude. Personally, in returning to the subject of social intelligence, I think that it would be an interesting subject to offer in different university degrees. Many conflicts would be avoided with our partners, patients, customers, suppliers and other people in general,